Pleased this morning to be able to introduce a speaker that was willing to come down from Seattle, Washington and speak at 6 o'clock in the morning his time. This gentleman really doesn't need a whole lot of introduction. He's about one of the most popular astrologers in the country right now. He is a full-time professional, as I said, from Seattle. And we're real happy to have Jeff Green here this morning, and his lecture is going to be on Pluto, the Evolutionary Journey of the Soul.
Thank you. Good morning. Awake and ready? Yep. Good. So what this material deals with is that question that many people ask: why am I here, and what are my lessons? For those that are doing counseling astrology, you will have noticed over the last 4 to 5 years that there has been an increase in the clientele that has been asking these questions. Many people are becoming socially alienated because the existing social structure is beginning to collapse. So all the mythologies and social models that many people have bought into aren't working. So more and more people are asking these questions. And so, from an astrological point of view, there is a way to answer it. And that's exactly what this material is for. Because what these questions imply are the evolutionary nature of our life. And at a deeper level, life to life. Now, when you deal with this issue of reincarnation, or life to life, or the progressive journey of the soul, or the transmigration of the soul, whatever you want to call it, please remember it's only been in the last few centuries in the West that this natural law has been doubted and or questioned. Even today, 2/3 of the planet, the population, still has such a belief structure. It has been the most prevailing belief structure throughout history. So if you want to talk about something that can be classified as a norm, who do you think really is in the minority? But the great thing is that, in other words, if you're conformity orientated, why not conform to this norm? You understand my point? So the great news is that you don't have to take it on belief either. It can in fact be proven. How? Let's take a nature of a word that exists in all language. All languages. And let's just focus on one word called growth. A word describes a process or a phenomenon. So, the bottom line, if we only have one life, if it's just one time around, why grow? For what purpose? What's the intent? Why would people feel that they have something that they learn behind any given experience? For what purpose? So my point is that words describe process. What process are we describing? In addition, when you deal with the nature of the soul, because most of us have been exposed to this word, it exists again in many languages, many races, over vast amounts of time. But what in reality is a soul? Can we give it a descriptive quality? Again, a word describes something. It describes some sort of phenomenon. So what is this word soul describing? Just to put us on common footing, let's perhaps try to agree on a simple definition. Let's try and call it an immutable consciousness. Immutable meaning it cannot be destroyed. That has its own inherent individualized structure. i.e., a soul has a structure. that has its own eternal identity. An example of this phenomenon would be Seth, i.e. Seth speaking through an entity named James Roberts. Who's doing the speaking? Seth. From a soul point of view, meaning that soul has that name. In effect, you have a egocentric structure within the soul itself. That's its own word, is it not? Ego. That of itself describes the phenomena, does it not? And we have all grown up in a culture, at least within the last 20 years or so, in which for those who have attempted to spiritualize, you have learned this thought to get rid of your ego. Well, for those that have struggled, you find out it's not possible. So what does that mean? I mean, we can't surgically open the brain and remove the ego. You can't even find it. You can't find thought, nor can you find consciousness. And yet it exists. For those that studied, excuse me, but you know, the early part of the lecture I'll probably just ramble here because it is 6 in the morning for me. So if you don't mind digressions. But you know, the Buddhists have a happy little saying called the causeless cause, or the formless form. If you really want to understand the nature of this truth, meditate on the nature of thought. It exists, but you can't find it. You can't open the brain and drag out a thought. So clearly it's a formless form. But anyway, the ego, what is it? Let's just use the happy analogy of a movie projector. And imagine now that you have a film thing, reel of film. And you've got a screen. If you don't have a lens, are you going to see the images on the film? Similarly, the ego of the soul and the personality that it manifests are focusing agents within consciousness. From a purely energy point of view, it's a vortex that creates an image of oneself. And is necessary. It cannot be removed. It's an inherent structure of consciousness. Even if you take your greatest of the great, the Jesuses, the Moseses, the Buddhas, they could not even utter their own name, without an egocentric structure to create the name. So the issue is not getting rid of the ego, so to speak. It's ultimately, the issue metaphysically is to align it, unify it with a higher will and or higher ego, and you can call that God. This is the true meaning of those words, getting rid of the ego, in a sense of just identifying with it subjectively. So really what you have here is a mistranslation from Eastern literature to West. So the soul has an inherent structure. It's an immutable consciousness. It has its own identity. And it cannot be destroyed. Now, we can ask the following big question. Why was the soul created? In the first place. And who created it? What created it? And for what purpose? And this is where you start getting into the nature of religions, don't you? Oh, God. So, we'll leave that for you to ponder. What we do know is that it exists. Now, the only thing I would say about that, especially for you Virgos, just meditate on the nature and origin of imperfection. The origin. Meaning, if you accept the belief that what you call God or the source created everything, wherein lies the origin of imperfection. The point here is that if the Creator was perfect in the beginning, there would be no need to create.
Your logo is stuttering.
Aye. This is not working. Oh well.
All this meditating on imperfection,
I guess so. Overload the circuits or something. So my point is that if that what is called the Creator is perfect in the beginning, there would be no need to create anything. But also try and keep in mind this following fact, and which is the basis of evolution, by the way. The interface between imperfection and perfection. And again, I ask you the question, wherein lies the origin of this issue? It exists because it exists. We can observe it, we feel it, we experience it. That cannot be doubted. So my big metaphysical question to you and myself is, wherein lies the origin of this issue? Because it always exists. After your body dies and mind dies, it still exists. It exists in the next person, the next person, the next person. But try and remember that, if we use the analogy, let's use, imagine now, water. And if I pour water into this cup, is not that water going to reflect the nature and structure of this cup versus the inherentness of the totality of the water? Similarly, when you take the phenomena of consciousness and you pour it into the inherent structure of human consciousness, it can only understand the truth that that consciousness is capable of understanding. It reflects it. That's why you have all these personified images of God and the goddess, reflecting human form. But my point to you is this: what if we lived on some planet in the Pleiades? And the nature of creation there relative to consciousness was different. Would not their pantheon of God and goddesses reflect that? Or do you think it's going to reflect our image? So, do you understand my point? So, if we deal with the nature of the soul, what you have relative to this interface between perfection and imperfection is the linkage to desire. Desire. The desire to perfect. The desire to be perfect. The desire to eliminate imperfection. / growth. / evolution. We can all, again, don't take this on faith, we can prove it right now. Is it not true? Because look, the evolution of the soul in the end is based on the elimination, the progressive elimination of imperfect / separating desires. Separating from what? That which created the soul, whatever that may be. And so you have this inner dynamic in the soul, one desire to separate, one desire to return. which is, in fact, the basis of what a psychologist would call free choice, and or what an esoterist will call karma, meaning that which you desire must translate into an action. And relative to Newton's observation of gravity, cause and effect, you have a reaction, which is equal or proportionate to the action. This we can see. So, to prove it, is it not true that any of us can have whatever separating desire, the new sofa, the new lover, the new position, and we might have the ability to obtain what we desire, and we might have a temporary sense of satisfaction, eh? But what replaces it? Is it not dissatisfaction, the sense of something more? Yes or no? Yes. This is a perfect empirical proving of this simple law. It's not their hypothesis, you've just validated it yourself through your life, as all peoples have for all time. So, you have the nature then of the evolution of the soul, the progressive elimination of separating desire. It is the very basis of Buddha's enlightenment underneath the Bodhi tree, as he pondered the nature of sorrow, misery, pain. His conclusion, desire, was the basis of. If you just take a look at the nature of our world now, and you focus upon the nature of separating desire, now manifesting through the subjective ego, now that Pluto's in Scorpio. Don't you see, just as a simple example, because this transit now is squaring the Pluto and Leo people. And this is the generation that has now become the yuppies. Scorpio. And what you have there is, I'm going to get mine, Leo, while I can, Scorpio. You understand my point? And of course, a lot of these folks back in the 60s were the hippies. So what kind of metamorphosis? Scorpio. Does this imply from a hippie lifestyle value system, thank you, to to a yuppie? You see my point? So, the nature of the soul is to evolve through time-space. And there are two kinds of evolution that, again, we can empirically prove and or observe. There is cataclysmic evolution, as in an earthquake, a volcano, Watergate, Iran Gate, Pluto transiting Venus. No. Or the slow yet progressive evolution, as in Darwin's notion of uniformity, the theory of uniformity. Cataclysmic evolution occurs for two reasons. Either through personal or collective resistance to what is needed, evolutionarily speaking, from the point of view of change. And in effect, resisting necessary change. The reason that what would be the basis of the resistance? What for? The Pluto question is why. because that's what constitutes one's immediate reality, individually or collectively, is formulated from that which has come before, the past, which has led to this moment even as we're speaking. And thus security. It's a known quantity. It is familiar. I can control it. I know it. One of the central components to security in all human consciousness is the need for self-consistency. Thus, when your self-consistency is challenged, your security is challenged. If my immediate reality that I know and can control is challenged, I feel insecure. Thus I resist. If I resist for too long, relative to necessary change, cataclysm. The deeper force is not your resistance, it's evolutionary necessity. It's a principle of water returning to the sea. It will get there. So just as Nixon tried to resist what was happening around him, keeping in mind he has a 10th house Pluto, which was the resistance based on, it happened anyway, relative to evolutionary necessity. And keeping in mind that Watergate exactly happened when Pluto was transiting Nixon's south node, the past, coming to a head. Coincidence, synchronicity. Then you have, of course, non-cataclysmic change, which is simply slow, progressive evolution. One thing evolving to another thing over a great amount of time. Now, oh, the other reason, by the way, for cataclysm, sorry, I'm spaced, is a result of karma, meaning some prior action equaling a reaction which is either happening now or has been deferred and is happening now. In other words, if I go out and kill somebody now, it's not fated that I myself get killed now. It can happen later, can it not? That's a deferred reaction. These are, again, things that just happen. It's life. It's not theory or hypothesis. My point is, how do you explain it? You all awake and ready? Is it too heavy or what? We can measure this dynamic, i.e. the soul, it's this dual desire nature, the interface between the past, the future, and the moment, and the birth chart. It comes back to the original question, why am I here? What are my lessons? Because again, those imply evolutionary intent. So the Pluto position and the natal chart, individually speaking, correlates to what the past has been for that particular individual. What kinds of desires have been in operation prior to this manifestation, to this life? What constitutes familiar memories and or experiences that the soul automatically gravitates to in this life?